Are we? All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to my channel, K Fits My Life. I have a very, very special guest today. Somebody that it was so weird how I met this man. I was doing Uber and I got a request, and it was weird because I almost didn't pick him up because he was down the street from my mom and dad's house. And I was like, I don't even want to go over there. But I went over there and picked him up, and we ended up having a really good conversation on a really stormy day. It started out beautiful and it ended up storming so hard, but we had this great conversation. And I really want to introduce him to you guys. I think he has a story that will help everybody. So guys, please welcome Michael Ricks. He's an artist, he is an author, and he is a survivor. So Mike, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing?
It's a beautiful evening, and we're heading into fall, and just taking life as it comes. And I appreciate you, Keith, for bringing me on. And I'm glad that we connected, and that you were, like, okay, I'll go ahead and take the drive. And turned out, to be one of those things where it was a good thing that we connected and that we met,
Yeah, really. I mean, we sat out in the car in the rain and just sat and continued our conversation for about 10 or 15 minutes after we got to his place, because it was just such an interesting story. I hadn't heard anything like it. So I guess let's go ahead and jump in, man. How did you get into this Faith Assembly organization? What is it? And how did you become a part of it, man?
Well, my parents were the ones that started and initiated, the membership within this church. My parents were both, from Lima, Ohio, very progressive people in the sense that they wanted to be educated, wanted to be, my dad was going to school to be a doctor. My mom was going to school for psychology. And so both of them were, in their college years, and my mother had just finished her psychology degree. My father was heading into residency to be a family practitioner and also a heart surgeon.
Okay.
And so in the process of doing that, they both are on the Bowling Green State University campus as young adults, and they get married. And during their time at that campus, they get converted to Christianity. And a college friend introduces them to this particular gentleman who is driving all the way from Noble County, Kosciuszko County, Indiana, up by Fort Wayne, all the way into Toledo, Bowling Green State University, and doing these Bible study gatherings at Prout Chapel on the Bowling Green State University campus. And so this was their first introduction to Faith Assembly and to Hobart Freeman, who was the pastor of the church at Faith Assembly. And he was the catalyst for, changing the direction of my parents' life. As my parents, were kind of the first generation in their family to step into such prestigious careers. My grandmother on my dad's side, my dad's mother, she was in the Red Cross during World War II. My grandfather was in the medical profession as a mortician and a nurse, and my grandmother, who was in Red Cross, was also a nurse. My mother's father and mother, he was a police officer, my mother's father, and my mother's mother was a AT&T phone operator back in the day when they would take the pins and connect the calls. Some of y'all will not even be able to understand, but that was the World War II era. So my parents were baby boomers, so they connected with this guy Hobart Freeman, and they began to teach doctrine to my parents that was not just typical Baptist or typical Methodist doctrine, and they were considered more of a Pentecostal, non-denominational, but their roots were in Pentecostal or in holiness. doctrines or teachings. And some of you guys are probably familiar with some of these teachings, like no watching TV, no, music that was not church music, no movies, no, women only wearing dresses, no makeup, just these very strict religious tenets, which across a lot of the Pentecostal church organizations was probably not that abnormal. A lot of you guys probably heard of Jimmy Swagger, of Jimmy and Tammy Faye Baker, of Kenneth Hagin, Oral Roberts. I'm trying to think of some of the other contemporary preachers that would have been coming out of the 70s and into the 80s, and they were considered televangelists. Mm-hmm. So Hobart Freeman had a big market going with, his own AM show, his own book library where he wrote a whole bunch of different books, and also a very large audio library back then on cassette tapes where he continued these teachings. So, in the spirit of kindness and in the spirit of forgiveness, I hold no ill will toward Hobart or toward Faith Assembly, but understanding that getting into religious paths can sometimes be filled with tremendous amounts of error and tremendous amounts of good intentions, but just instead of going straight, they're going off, too far to the extreme as far as conservative beliefs, or sometimes too far to the left with very, very loose and sometimes unintentionally just very simple beliefs. And that was the beliefs where I grew up were not simple. They were very complex and very controlling, deceptive, and abusive. So having laid out that kind of a factor, laid out those kinds of things, I don't want to just talk and talk and talk. Tell me what is there anything that's coming to mind as you're thinking of this?
Yeah. I'm wondering how that played the whole process of them starting. I think we're echoing. Sorry. How did the application of those teachings affect your life? I know you're talking about the way that they applied the doctrine. How did the application of those doctrines affect you in your personal day-to-day life?
Well, ultimately, it changed my day-to-day life. As my father began to follow these teachings, he got more and more entrenched and began to change his lifestyle daily, mm-hmm. to where he became, very much a Bible reader, very much someone who was praying all the time. And then ultimately, as more of the teachings got into his life, he became more and more strict, more and more less happy, less emotionally expressive, more oppressive of my mother. My mother became more codependent, and I became less and less able to share my own feelings, talk about how I was thinking, and became less and less involved in the world around me. Ultimately, the big change came when we were living in Lima, Ohio, because I was born in Toledo, Ohio.
Okay.
I was 4 years old. My parents moved us to Lima, Ohio. And in Lima, Ohio, we were there for another 4 years. And then when I was 8 years old, they moved to Indiana, and my dad talked my mother into selling everything to go to this church. Now, as this is happening, my father has been following the cassette tapes. This preacher has been driving, pretty consistently still to the Toledo or Lima area. And my father has now embraced the teachings. One of them was, the big clincher was no medical treatment other than prayer or homeopathic or natural remedies. So ultimately, our family gets on this Greyhound bus. There's four brothers and sisters by this time in my family, beside myself, because I'm the oldest. Mm-hmm. And we get on this Greyhound bus. My parents have sold everything in Lima, Ohio, and we're driving, the long drive to Kosciuszko County, Warsaw, Indiana. And we get on Warsaw, Indiana, and we get to Warsaw, Indiana. My father had made an arrangement to meet this particular gentleman there. And we get off the bus, and we've got 2 suitcases and the 4 of us. And that is literally all we had. And that night was a Wednesday night. And I remember that being the night that we, piled in the car. We really were crowded in this man's vehicle. And as we were, piled into the car, let's call him Jim. As we were piled into Jim's car, we're all, in his car, and we get there, and that's our first Wednesday night service. And I'll never forget, it was a steel brown building that could seat approximately 1,500 to 2,000 people. Mm-hmm. And the lights were all fluorescent lights. It's all cement floors. It's in the middle of a cornfield. There's rocks this big around in the parking lot, just covers the parking lot. And there is, just this brown steel building, like warehouse style building, with kind of that A-frame style. But it was huge, probably the size of a Walmart.
Okay.
You can kind of picture that with nothing in it, and just white walls and, big scripture scrolled on different sides of the walls, big block letter painted on. And then the pulpit had this wall around it, and the stage was probably like 20 by 20 feet.
Okay.
All white carpet. It was all white carpet on the back wall, and then a door on that back wall. And then in front, there was a podium, and it was all covered with white carpet. And then up to about where you could just about not see over it was this podium, not podium, but wall with brown paneling, like brown wood paneling all along that wall. So, and that's where the pastor would preach from. So that was our introduction to the whole Indiana Faith Assembly thing. And, my parents went into this, with full devotion, with full faith, and with hopeful hearts. And they were like, man, we're getting ready to really turn on a great life path. We're really getting ready to do something special with our lives and really follow, we're getting ready to do the ultimate spiritual journey. And that's going to be the most, oh my God, if we had missed this, we would have missed, the big gold rush opportunity.
Wow. So how did they change from the time, like you said specifically, you started to see some changes in them? Was there any specific thing that was the catalyst for that? Besides, was there any specific instruction that they were given that was told, okay, you need to behave this way, you need to behave or that way? Was there something given to them that made them do that?
Yes. There was a situation where as they, I always remember my dad being so seeking to be pure, to be holy, to be devoted, to be as right with God as possible. Mm-hmm. So his devotion was always so intense. So one day he listens to this cassette tape by one of the assistant pastors. And in this particular sermon, there was a Bible character named Jonah. And Jonah, if some of you may or may not know the Bible characters, his whole thing was that he was a prophet in the Bible that heard from God, and he was told to go to this city called Nineveh in the Middle East, which is a real city, which is a real location, even in the world today. It's a different name, but he was supposed to go there and tell them to turn back to God. Well, we know that he did not do that in the Bible story, and he ended up getting swallowed by a very large fish for 3 days. And in this sermon, it's all about, if you run from God, if you think you can get away from God's plan and you think you can sidestep God wanting you to be called to do XYZ, he will go after you just like he did Jonah and swallow you up. He will send a fish of circumstances in your world that will consume you until you become obedient, you know. And so my dad is, you know, in his early mid-20s, and he's the, oh my God, yeah. You know, what is, you know, and this, and he would always quote this statement from this, you know, particular sermon. And there was this clincher statement. God has a ways and means committee by which he will get to you.
Wow, for real.
So my dad had been toying with the idea prior to this sermon. And now this is before we left Ohio and got on the Greyhound bus.
Mm-hmm.
This is before, you know, when I'm about 4 or 5 years of age, still in Toledo, Ohio. And my dad is at this point still in residency. And, you know, Lima, Ohio was where my parents were both from while they're attending college in Bowling Green State University. So when they eventually made their, you know, trek out of Toledo back to Lima, there was a hospital there called St. Rita's Hospital, which is a Catholic hospital. And they told my father, if you come back to Lima, Ohio, and open a practice and move here and be one of the be one of the first Black doctors in the 70s to come into the Lima area with his credentials. They said, we'll pay off your student loans, we'll buy you a house, we'll help you get a mortgage, we'll open an office for you, and all you got to do is come back and use your doctor's, you know, credentials at, you know, for your own practice and for the hospital, St. Rita's Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And so by this point, my dad hears this sermon. He's in residency, and he completely quits the medical profession. My mother, you know, stops any job progress as she was seeking a job in the psychology field. And that's when my father, you know, moves our family back to Lima, Ohio. We continue listening to Hobart sermons via the traveling minister that would come every Tuesday night to the Toledo location. And then as we made our way to Lima, there was like about 4 years by the time I turned 8 years old, where our family was just kind of like in this space where my dad really couldn't, you know, he was working in restaurants. He was just out there kind of just not really making his mark. And, you know, my mother was a stay-at-home mother. So then my father begins to have aspirations to be in ministry and to be a Bible teacher and be someone that teaches Bible doctrine. Well, by this point, you know, moving to Indiana to attend the church was looking incredibly like the ultimate, you know, mecca of decisions, so that he would be able to feel like he was moving forward in his spirituality.
So are you saying that he specifically gave up the prospect of him being a doctor, his everything that he has studied, he did that specifically for this organization? Yeah,
he specifically, you know, by that statement, God will get to you, that was the statement that made him say, okay, it's time for me to exit. I'm out of the medical profession. And, you know, my grandparents, his parents had, you know, they were just beyond proud. You know, Michael's going to be a doctor.
Right.
You know, you're coming out of the segregation. You're coming out of all those factors. And here's my dad. He's the first one in the family to go on ahead and start to do something really incredible compared to where my grandparents, you know, coming out of segregation and all that stuff, they were like, Michael's getting ready to be the, you know, the dog, the big dog, you know. And it's
amazing how similar those organizations are to the JWs. It's the same thing. A lot of people give up their aspirations to be, to go to higher education, which will allows them to do greater things that they want to do, simply because the organization says you should not pursue those things and concentrate more on the organization. There's so many similarities in that organization. And you also mentioned the blood issue, the medical issue. How with the Jehovah's Witness organization, it's basically about not taking blood. What was the extent of that medical directive with the organization that you were a part of?
Well, blood transfusions would have definitely been out of the question. Um, um, and they began to teach doctrines, saying that if you were truly trusting God, that you would be only receiving healing by way of prayer, by way of faith, by way of home-based remedies, natural remedies, and ultimately, if you were walking in the right level of spirituality, then you would be receiving or experiencing physical healing by way of these spiritual teachings that said, if you pray enough, if you say the right number of texts from the Bible over yourself, if you have a positive confession or an affirmation that you're speaking to your own consciousness over your own body, that if you did that enough, certain healings would result. And I don't believe that that's entirely untrue, but they completely devalued the fact, or dismissed the fact, that even in the Bible, Luke, who was one of the 12 apostles and one of Jesus' disciples, specifically was mentioned as a doctor in the Bible. And they specifically overlooked things like, passages in the Bible that say things like laughter does good like a medicine, or even Paul in the Bible, in the New Testament passages, talking to one of the pastors in the book of Ephesians at the church of Ephesus, which is near Athens, Greece, in today's world, told him to drink wine to kill a stomach bug. So they ignored very, very blatant pieces of information like that.
How did it ever get to a point where that medical situation affected you personally?
Yes. What happened is that I ended up suffering, asthma. Give me 2 seconds.
Oh, no problem, Mike.
I'm sharing our conversation here.
Okay.
On YouTube, on Facebook, so people can jump on as well.
Awesome.
And
Awesome.
There. So yes, about age 11 or 12, I started having asthma issues. Now, my mother had these issues before, was on medication, and had situations with it. Now, here's the funny dynamic here. My mom was on all the meds, couldn't eat bread, couldn't eat cheese, couldn't drink milk. Immediately, she would get in contact with hay or pet dander, and she would have an asthma attack. Well, through prayer, my mom completely came off all medications, came off all, I watched her eat hamburgers, cheese, milk, all that stuff from my growing up years, I never saw my mother deal with any medical issues. Well, after that, and it was something that, she couldn't even get ice cream, so to see her go from that, especially when I was 4, 5, 6 years of age, and to watch those symptoms completely go away. But then when I turned 11 and 12 or so, I start having asthma issues. And I later find out that these asthma issues were what was called stress-induced asthma. So the condition and the environment that I was growing up in was creating an emotional distress in me physically, especially because I wasn't communicating and I was stuffing and ignoring those feelings. So my physical reaction was an asthma reaction. And so then that led into severe asthma, where I would go, say on a Monday night like this, start having issues, say, 6, 7 in the evening, start not being able to breathe, start feeling really restricted and needing a inhaler for relief, or steroid, which usually you're taking at the beginning of the day to keep your lungs from even having an asthma attack. And then you have a rescue inhaler. So you have a steroid inhaler that you're supposed to take in the morning. And then if you happen to still have an asthma attack, you're supposed to have a rescue inhaler, which immediately opens your lungs back up. Well, I would not be getting these treatments, which is what in the occult world is called medical negligence.
Okay.
And so ultimately, this dynamic creates a circumstance where I start having 3-day asthma attacks. So it would start on a Monday night. I'd be literally leaning up against the couch with a wife beater on and the fan on high, because I would get extremely hot and sweat and be just like breathing this much, and then by Wednesday mid-morning, my body would kick it over and I would go back to breathing normally. However, with very, very physically weak by this point, having not eaten for the last 3 days, very little, just walking to the bathroom during that time would literally make me completely out of breath.
How old were you?
12, 11, 13, 14.
Okay.
So this went on for a good 2 to 3 years. And ultimately, the big disappointment is, while we're still attending this church, by this point, by this age, 11, 13, 14, Hobart Freeman has been dead since 86. So he died from stepping on a nail and refusing medical treatment.
Really?
Becoming poisoned himself.
Wow.
And then once that materialized, when I was 14, now, this church had families that were big families. They didn't believe in birth control. So that, people were just having children naturally. Most were born at home. However, there were midwives within the congregation that, facilitated births because there was no hospitalization of someone in the process of having a birth. So ultimately, families continued to get in trouble with the court system because of refusing to take their children to medical treatment.
Okay.
So in Kosciuszko County, by this point, there are several multi-million-dollar lawsuits from people that were advised by church doctrine and church leaders, specifically the main pastor. And then when things did not materialize, there were lawsuits that resulted because of deaths where people did not recover. And then there ended up being first, 3-year, 2-year, 4-year sentences, especially for the husbands of these families where they didn't take their children to doctors.
So wait a minute. You're saying that there were lawsuits filed against the families that refused to take their children for medical treatment?
Yes, they were considered, medical neglect cases.
Really?
Yes. By the end of the 90s, there was, by the early 90s, there were so many cases that the prosecutors had it up to here, and they were just like, okay, you want to do this? 10 years, bam. And these folks would go away for 10 years.
Wow.
And, ultimately the church, dissolved and things didn't continue. But when I was 14, I realized that certain things had materialized to where my brother got sick at 6 months of age, and about the time that he was, over a week suffering with these conditions, he was not able to, recover. And my dad is praying profusely for his healing, and he is praying for him to recover. And ultimately, on a Saturday morning, I'm standing there watching my father, just begging God and just, be healed in the name of Jesus, be healed, and just, quoting Bible passages from the Bible text, and just, he's holding my brother on the thing and on his knees in the living room on the sofa, and I'm standing there, and I'm seeing him breathe some, not breathe some, and there's this back and forth. And finally, I see him completely expire, completely die.
Wow. Wow.
And so that was, I just remember, not being able to encapsulate that feeling and not being able to, address the sense of shock and the sense of the emotional condition that I experienced at that moment. And it took me till the beginning of this year. I realized it was horror. Just, like somebody taking a vacuum cleaner, this big, and just putting it on your soul and just, and I just remember something in me snapped that day.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember not being able to cry. I remember just feeling this very holding on, clenching feeling, like if I did grieve or if I did cry, that I would just disintegrate, So it created a condition of detachment, and what you would call it is trauma, and you would probably call it PTSD.
Right.
So from that standpoint, by this point, my parents are now brought before the authorities, and things are where we are removed from our family. I'm standing out in the front yard and, watching the coroner, take my brother's body out of the house. I'm watching, days later as TV cameras and, long shot lens cameras are placed on the curb of our road where, because our house was in a trailer park, and at this time we're living in a 4-bedroom double wide trailer way out in the middle of the country in a trailer park with probably about 20, 30 trailers, most of whom were all church people in this cult. And, they're taking photos and putting us on the front page in Noble County, Indiana. My parents were then put on probation, and they were allowed to, be dismissed from us as kids. And my grandmother stepped into the picture and took custody of all 7 of us kids and kept us from being sent each to a different foster home, put in an orphanage of some kind. And that took us from Indiana, Noble County, and back to Lima, Ohio. So I went from living in the country, running in the cornfields, playing acoustic guitar and listening to, very acoustic, kind of music, going to and from Warsaw, Indiana, Fort Wayne, Indiana, North Webster, Indiana, Columbia City, Indiana, kind of a rural farm world, seeing the Amish ride by in horses and buggies, to now I'm in the inner city of Lima, Ohio, thrust right into the middle of the inner city during the Too Legit to Quit with MC Hammer and the Parachute Pants and baby fro and a.
You couldn't tell me I wasn't MC Hammer, Mike. That's that's one of the things that taught me how to dance, bro. I used to think I was MC Hammer for real, man.
Well, dude, that dude is skilled, man. Him and Michael Jackson should have did the dance off. It would have been.
They should have. So let me ask you this, Mike. I think I remember us touching on the process that you went through to heal yourself, to get to the point where you are now. It's weird. It's funny that we're having this conversation now, because Sunday, I guess that's yesterday, I did a video about whether or not to forgive your parents, your family and friends who shun you. And I would imagine, being someone in your position and seeing what you saw, you probably came to a crossroads about how you felt about your parents. How did you feel about your parents, and how did you get to a place where you are now in relation to how you felt about your parents?
Well, this started a journey of healing of journey. Wouldn't it be nice to see Steve Perry go back and sing with Journey? That's my ADD kicking in. Okay.
We got to get you to sing a little bit and do your thing before we get out of here. We got to show everybody how talented you are, brother.
Well, thank you, man. I got my banjo sitting right here.
I see you.
A journey of healing. And so in 2009, I moved to Nashville from Lima, Ohio, through a series of circumstances that brought me to a fork in the road where I had to make a choice about how I was going to live my life. When I was 22, I had a conversation with my dad that took well over an hour. And I just said, hey, man, I can't live this way anymore. I can't follow this path. I can't follow this doctrine. And I kept having, being torn between two opinions. Like, do I go his way? By this point, my parents have done their punishment, and had sorry about the text coming through here. And they had, some visitation rights were reestablished. And so, here I am, an adult, 22 years of age, and I had been waiting for my dad to kind of say, okay, son, you're 21. You've made the journey into manhood. Here is where things begin to progress. Here's how you, rent a house or buy a house or, pay for an apartment or, write a check for, a checking account. This is how you proceed with all these, life decisions that really, after you learn about the birds and the bees, you've got to learn how to go ahead and live life.
Right.
Waiting, and that conversation never happened. And so when I was 22, I was like, okay, this is that point where I make that decision. And I said, okay, I'm taking the decision to move outward and move forward. And I had that conversation with my dad and said, hey, I can't do this anymore. I've never been that kid that, got anyone pregnant or, was in jail or, was in trouble with the law or particularly rebellious or doing drugs or, and I had adhered to the family doctrine. And so I found myself saying, I've got to go ahead and take my step away from this. And that was me saying, okay, I'm out. And he, said his part about, well, how could you do this? How could you, I've taught you all these years. And I'm like, well, this is not the right path. And I stepped away, and within days of that decision, I made my first trip to Nashville and came to do some music seminars, to visit some music seminars. And then I went back to Nashville and back to Ohio, and came to a point where I went through a divorce, got downsized out of my job in 2008, began to be suicidal because of the abusive woman that I had married back in 2007. So by 2008, the economy is beginning to crash, and I'm being downsized out of this job that I'm working as a car salesman for Toyota and Honda. And by the following, 2 or 3 months into 2008, the economy full on crashes. And by 2008, I'm becoming suicidal as the marriage condition of this abuser that I married in 2007 begins to progress worse and worse. And in 2009, a buddy calls me to visit Nashville because he got signed with a record deal. Says, come down, I've gotten the record deal. We're wanting to have a celebration. We're wanting to party. I get to Nashville. We have dinner with him and two other friends, who turns out to be a pastor. And during that conversation, we exchanged some details about Moses, Samuel, and David, which I had been praying about in 2008 prior to that meeting. In 2009, this meeting is now taking place as I've come to Nashville. We get done with that meeting. We get in the car. My buddy Leroy gets in on the right-hand side, in the passenger side. I sit down in the seat too far, and I push on the brake to sit up in the seat more tall, and I hear, and it's the brake lines blowing. I'm thinking the master cylinder has gone out or something like that. And I tell my buddy, hey, I think we just blew the brakes. Something's not right. I open the car door, and there's a trickle of fluid, running out from underneath the driver's side.
Somebody cut your brake lines. She cut your brake lines.
Something happened in it. Now I can't leave Nashville. Can't leave Franklin, Nashville. And I'm like, man, this is so not good. So I talked with the pastor, and he's like, there's these 3 Bible characters he's telling me about. Because when we get into that lunch situation, prior to the breaks situation happening, we're at in lunch, and he says, would you like to lead worship for our church? And this is my buddy Leroy. What he's done is, when he gets me to come down to Nashville, he had backdoored me and gotten this pastor to come meet with him, to offer me a job. Mm. He knows I'd been unemployed for 2 years. Mm-hmm. So he says, and I said, dude, I'm a basket case. I'm suicidal. I'm in the process of a divorce. I'm, devastated emotionally. I don't have any sense of direction. Everything is exploding in my life. I've been unemployed for 2 years. You're starting a new church. You do not want me in your church. I'm a scandal waiting to happen in your brand new church. And he puts his hand up and says, remember Moses, Samuel, and David. And I had been in the car praying through, the condition and the circumstances that I'm in. And I just kind of have a prayerful thought in my mind of how Moses was on the backside of the desert when God decided to speak to him, when he's completely isolated and exiled for committing murder. Samuel, who had never heard the voice of God, is living in the temple with the high priest at the time. And the high priest says, go back, get back in bed. And when you hear the voice again, say, here am I, here I am. And then David in the Bible character, was always in trouble with his brothers or with the leadership around him. And they were always putting him down and trashing him out. And so those three people were firmly in my mind. So I sit down in front of this pastor and he says, remember David, remember how he was always being trashed by the leadership of his time and how he was rejected, but even though he was rejected, God had called him. Remember how Moses, when he was in exile, God chose to speak to him when he's in his worst place and worst condition. Remember how Samuel was told by the prophet, go back to bed. And when you hear the voice, say, here I am, right? And I'm looking at him like, who told this guy this stuff? And my heart began to beat really heavy. And I'm like, man, what is this moment that I'm in? Well, we then finish that conversation. We get in the car and that's when the brakes go out. So needless to say, that brought me into Nashville and I had to get a job. I had $600 saved. All the car repair shops that I called, they said, well, that's going to be at least $600 to $1,000. I had $600 in the bank. That was it. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, there goes. If I try to repair the car, I'm going to be completely out of money. So we literally drive my buddy all the way, Leroy, who was in the passenger seat, all the way back to Antioch, on the emergency brake in my two-door Toyota Camry, 1994 Camry. And we're like, okay, we're getting down to the stoplight, right about, shifted into neutral, slowing down. All right, we need to go ahead and pull the emergency gear. That's how we were stopping, driving all the way to his house. So I, end up staying with another friend here in Franklin, Nashville. And that started my journey to really getting myself healed, to getting myself recovered. And I ended up meeting a pastor here at Generations Church. And I started going through counseling and he got me into refuge centers counseling. And he began to talk to me about being deceived. Number one, that I was suffering abuse, not only from my ex-wife, but also because of the church I was in. Again, not the Faith Assembly Church, but by this time as of my adulthood, I'm with my ex-wife, who is now my ex-wife now, and I'm attending this church, and the pastor says to me, well, if you get a divorce, you better think about what you're doing. Because 2 weeks prior to this, he had said that anybody that is attending this church, especially people who are in leadership, and I was one of the main worship leaders and singers. I was singing on TV. I was singing on radio. Mm-hmm. I was on their CD, the church CD. I was on television. During the services, I was being filmed on TV. And he said, if you come to this church and we take you through the process, marriage counseling and all that, and then we officiate your wedding, and then you get divorced, don't come back to this church.
Wow.
So that conversation, talking about, coming to 2009 and coming to a point of divorce, that was my last service there, that last conversation with him. But that was a turning point in my life. And as I got into Nashville and started having counseling, I just began to go through this epiphany that I had been walking in deception, control, and abuse. And over the next, 9 years up to this point, it brought me to the point where I started telling my story and stopped being ashamed and stopped being fearful. And in 2016, several different people kind of, got into my life more than what I was normally telling folks. The cult upbringing, very, very whitewashed. I wasn't telling people what happened in my life. And
Hold
so,
on 1 second. Hold on. Let me pause you right there because you're getting into some really, really good stuff. Let me ask you something. What allowed you, or what was the thing that made you decide that it was okay for you to go ahead and go into counseling? Because we've talked, I haven't talked to you personally, but one of the things, especially with the Black community, that has been talked about is that there is a big mental health problem, and that a lot of Black men, especially, are refusing or they are very standoffish and don't consider going into counseling, especially for things like people who are leaving a religious organization. I had a conversation with someone today, literally today,
wow.
and because of the video that I made Sunday about whether or not to forgive parents who shun you, Mike, I'm not really that dude, but that is such a sore subject for me that while I was doing the live stream, I almost started crying during the live stream because it's still a very sore spot. And so the person that I was talking to today was saying, you know what, you've gotten yourself very far the way you are now, but if you were to go and talk to somebody, they would probably be able to give you some tools that will help you to get even further. So this is a situation for me where I'm thinking, okay, what is the thing that happens that lets you know, okay, I need to go and talk to someone? With you, what was that situation and how did it feel? How did it help you when you went to talk to someone?
Utter devastation, man. When I came here, I would sit in my room at my buddy Rico's house. Once I basically realized that because of the car brake situation, I wasn't going to leave. And he helped me have my first place to live as a roommate with him here in Franklin, Brentwood, just south of Nashville. And I remembered being so empty, so desperate, so broken, just could not even mentally, literally even carry the nature of what was happening, as I literally realized every single thing that I'd ever believed, built my life on, had literally in the course of 2007 to 2009 had completely crumbled. So I had been brought to a place of absolute desperation, absolutely being crushed to where I was not even recognizable to my own self. And I remember, being suicidal. I remember sitting in my room once I was here in Tennessee and just crying. Like I would just sit there in the room and just start crying. I mean, I would put on Christian music, specifically Jesus Culture's song, How He Loves. And I realized I did not truly understand God. I had heard so many lies, so many deceptions. There'd been so much control and so much abuse that I had no spiritual basis or could not tell what my life was even based on anymore. So that I remember mentally picking up everything and then just saying, you know what, this whole religion thing, roll down the window and chuck it out on the street. Literally in my mind, I just remember saying, in order for me to rebuild at this present moment, I've got to just take everything that I've ever thought was worthwhile and throw it away. And then, you asked me about my parents. My mother, by this point, has divorced my father. My father has continued his cultic ways and is now, and still continues to this day to be in that cult, still listening to the cassette tapes, audio tapes, and CDs or whatever he has.
Really?
Lives a very isolated life. So I'm still in contact with my mother, but in 2016, I stopped all communication with him. And then as those people began to meet me in 2016, they said, Michael, number one, your story is a movie. Number two, you need to write the book. I remember meeting Dr. Ming Wang, who's Nashville's most famous doctor.
The LASIK doctor.
He's the LASIK doctor.
Yeah.
He's, this guy's just has done so many big medical breakthroughs. So I'm sitting in, a church, Christ Presbyterian Church, and we're in the back in the music department, and he's spoken at our church and played some music that Sunday, and I had also sung that Sunday. And he says to me, he looks at me and says, "So what's your story?" And this guy's, very, very an Einstein. And he just finished his book, From Darkness to Sight, being an eye doctor and coming out of the communist revolution in China, coming from China and then coming to Nashville, leaving atheism and then becoming an eye surgeon. So, he had just finished writing his book, telling his life story. And that life story also got incorporated into the big movie called God's Not Dead. All that to say, he says to me, "What's your story?" And I tell him my story. And he just kind of sits there and just kind of was like this. And he reaches in his pocket and he says, "Here's my card. Write the book." And I was like, okay, that is like, okay. And he says, "I want you to meet my publisher." And he says, he makes a phone call the next day and emails this book publisher, and sends me to him and makes an appointment on my behalf. And all of a sudden, this whole thing is like scooping me up. And I'm kind of like, okay, telling this story, I think. Why is this a thing? Why is people want to know? I'm like, I grew up in the country. I'm the oldest of 9 kids. I play music. Please just know that. That's the good stuff. That's the good stuff. I don't want to tell the other stuff, okay? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like Dr. Ming is like, go on out there, tell that story. And I had, everywhere I went, beginning in 2016, I'm at a business meeting, and this couple is on stage, and they're in this business meeting. There's about 10,000 people in the room. And they're like, every time we get in our business, we tell people our story. We don't tell them about our money, our houses, our cars, our accolades, our awards. We tell them our story, the good, bad, ugly, and different. We tell them our story. I then meet Mr. Ming Wang, the doctor, and I had met several other people, and they're like, write the book. My music agent, she said, write the book. And I'm like, okay. And then everywhere I go, write the book, tell your story. I mean, literally everywhere I go, I'd hear the word story or tell your story. And it began to be like someone, in a mountain range, story. And I'm like, what is this? So in 2017, through a series of circumstances, I get robbed at gunpoint, and my landlord sells my apartment, and I ended up getting cast out of my living space because he did it on the fly over a 30-day period. I'm robbed at gunpoint by 5 thugs in East Nashville. I lose my car. I lose a month's worth of income. Then I ended up doing a house sitting job for a lady all of last year from like July through December. And I ended up getting approached by a Hollywood movie producer, and he says, I need you to, guess what? Write the book. He says, your story's a movie. So I sit down, write the book, and I start realizing that the biggest part of the healing process is telling your story.
Say that one more time, please, Mike. That is such a profound statement. Please say that one more time.
The biggest part of the healing process, at least in my experience, was telling your story. And for so many years, I had devalidated myself. I had dismissed myself. I did, and because of the horror and the pain, and even people would, in 2016, they'd ask me my story, and I'd start telling them the story, and I would just, their mouth would just, and I would tell it in everything, and I, kind of got it to where I could condense it down, and what would happen is, after I tell them, it would do the thing that happened to Mr. Ming Wang, Dr. Ming Wang. They would just sit there for like 20 seconds and not say nothing. And I was like, what is this? Like, what is this doing? What, I didn't know that if I told somebody what would happen, it would make them just sit there and look at me like, what was that? And I was like, wow, like either this is good or this is not good. Like what is this?
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing started happening as I was telling my story, the same thing that happened to you and me. People would tell their story and talk about what happened to them. And then they would say three things, and I'm going to try to remember these three things. They would say, you're like almost the only person I've told my story, whatever their horror, their personal horror was. They would say, if you had not spoken up, I would have not spoken up. And because you spoke up, you gave me the liberty to speak up and tell my story. And all of a sudden, I started realizing that my story had a redemptive, recovering, helping dimension that was in there, just undiscovered, that I had ignored it, that I had demonized myself, that I had self-hatred, self-loathing. When I was 11, 8, 10 years old, I would say to myself as a kid, when I get big, I ain't living like this. And I would just have this little thing, like a little stray hair that would just pop out, where I would just say that in my own little mind. I couldn't combat, I didn't have enough mental, intellectual arguments to combat what my father was saying, or what the preachers were saying. And I would just find myself saying, when I get big, I ain't doing this. And then, once I got to this point as an adult, I'm finding that courage to speak up. And I tell people, the first, I believe, path to justice for me as an individual was speaking up about my situation. And it was my first, actualization for me of beginning to experience justice, saying, no, this was terror. This was horror. This was evil, what was done to me, what happened to me. Some of it even, especially when I got to the point of like 2008, 2009, I am now on a path of bad choices, a bad path, because I am rehearsing and activating all those bad beliefs in my daily decisions, in the jobs I choose, in the people that I chose to date, in the people I chose to marry, in the churches I chose to attend. They all kept coming up toxic. I kept putting myself in toxic situations. So when you ask me, how did I get to the place of counseling? It came because I lost everything, because I went to the point of complete desperation. And so at that point, I'm, talking to the pastor of Generations Church here in Franklin, and he's saying, Michael, you've been deceived. You need counseling. You don't need just church counseling. You need clinical counseling.
Stop right there. Hold on 1 second, Mike. Hold on 1 second. Now that is a profound difference. Now, you have your views on religion. I have my views of religion. That doesn't make me feel any less about you or think any less of you as a person, because I respect you immensely for coming out and telling your story and just being the person that I met in the car when I picked you up that day. Your personal views don't matter. I'm not gonna hold that. That's not what we're here for. The thing that what you just said that means the most is that in the Jehovah's Witness organization, they put quote unquote elder counseling before professional counseling. And I think that must be a trait of these negative cult situations where they say, our counselors, even though they are not trained in any way, are the ones that you should be talking to resolve this personal issue you have. Now, that must have been a huge thing for you to hear this person who's in a church say, you don't just need to talk to us, you need to seek professional help.
Yes. Pastor Craig Wall, I got to give credit to him for literally saving my life. Not only did he counsel me But he, there were things, time over lunch or a little time in the church office where he was, exposing the lies that I was told. I remember this statement by him. He said, Michael, he says, I'm a pastor. He says, but my job is not to control you or to tell you the ultimate decision that you should make. I'm just here to kind of be an advisor, to be kind of a catalyst to help you hear for yourself and know within yourself what the right values and what the right choices are for you. I'm not supposed to control you and abuse you and tell you what to do. All I'm supposed to do is help you confirm, like be a confirming voice of in an affirmation type of a thing as a help, And he was like, I am just as much transparent and just as much on the same level like you. I just remember looking at him like, what? Did you just? And he was so humble and just so, and so, the thing that I discovered because of all this is the thing that began to be a statement that I began to hear in my heart over and over. Ask for help, ask for help, ask for help. You can't do it on your own. You're losing all your footing. You're losing all of your bearings. You are beyond where you can cope on this on your own. You must ask for help. And I began to realize that everything in my life was going to get better only if I said, okay, here it is. Here it is. You can see me from head to toe. I got dirt all over me. I got, I'm sick. I'm not well. Somebody put me in the doctor and let me get some help. And I had to let go. I had to, completely within the proper, proper boundaries of the proper people and the proper people that had meant me well and intended well for me truly. My eyes were beginning to open so I could see this is where I've been is not good. What I was told before were lies. What I began to have by those lies had begun to believe internally was also lies. That the worst kind of lies that I was doing was the lies I was telling myself that were playing on repeat from my childhood and from growing. And so I had to begin to get help. And I was so far down, the only way I could come back was by getting help. So that's how I made the transition to finally get help. I found myself in small Bible studies where there was confidentiality and the proper balance of spirituality, where there were prayers said around me and people began to treat me like family. I went from just attending church and being religiously pious to getting authentic help, help based in reality. When I was in Ohio, I remember asking the pastor of the church that I attended back then if I could get clinical counseling, because the things that were happening to my ex based upon her past and the things that were happening to me from the cult past, as I will only speak for myself, I knew that we both needed clinical counseling. And I'll never forget the pastor's statement. You only need what we're telling you. If you just obey the word of God, you'll be okay. If you just follow these scriptures and pray X number of hours every day and can pray these scriptures, remember that thing that I was saying, my dad would always pray script, same toxic statements. And I'm watching us get worse and worse and worse. And then finally I become suicidal. I'm having 3 and 4 day headaches. I'm going through an entire bottle of over-the-counter painkillers in an entire week. I'm going through, emptying the bottle. I'm taking 4 and 5, 6, 8 pills a day and having headaches last 4 and 5 days at a time. And I'm like, when I became suicidal, I'm like, oh my God, I have officially lost it. I am out of ammunition. I don't have any more personal, I can cope with this. So that's how I knew that I was where I needed to say, hands up, I'm I'm out of abilities to make this on my own.
Let me ask you this, Mike. How long, you said you had reached a point where you said you took everything about religion and threw it out the window.
Yes.
Now that, and I'm just gonna be, I'm a very transparent person with my channel. I tell them everything. I talk about everything about myself. I'm pretty open book. That is how I am right now. That's why when I say we differ in religious thinking, after I left the organization, I pretty much was like, yeah, I'm not down. I'm not thinking about that anymore. I can't put my faith in that way of thinking anymore. How long did it take you to get, how long and how did you get to a point where you no longer wanted to throw it out the window? You wanted to have a piece of that feeling in your life. How did you get to a point where you threw it out the window and said, wait a minute, let me go out the window and get this thing and bring it back into my life? What sparked that?
Well, you know, what brought that about was that I realized that, like, you know, having a moral compass, having a spiritual devotion, in other words, being able to recognize truth versus lies, like just getting to that place, being able to distinguish lies from truth and all that got me to a place where I could start to say, okay, hold on, you know, because not everything that happened to me as a kid was bad. You know, not everything that materialized in my life was bad. Some of it was actually, you know, healthy. Like my mother taught us how to share. You know, my mother, you know, taught me lots of scriptural passages. And a lot of those scriptural passages or Bible texts were not bad things. They were just, you know, they were in there mixed with the toxic beliefs.
Right.
My mom was a strong, you know, proponent of prayer. And my mother prayed all the time as a kid. We'd be sitting there, you know, going through homeschool. And my mom would pray, you know, probably 2, 3, 4 hours a day. She'd have a little box with scripture cards in it, and she'd be writing the scriptures in cursive. And she would have, you know, one card in front of her, and she'd be kind of like, and she'd pray these cards all day long, you know. And then, you know, my mother canned, and you know, my dad hung drywall, ended up in the drywall profession after leaving medical world, ended up in the medical profession. Mm-hmm. And I mean, not medical profession, but the construction profession.
Okay.
And so, I forgot our train of thought. What did you ask me again?
I asked you how you went from having religion thrown out the window to feeling like it needed to be in your life. Okay.
Well, the thing about religion is I never went back and got it. I never ever went back and got religion. I was like, oh, that was the whole big bad problem in the first place. Now I can go back and realign my spiritual devotion. I can go back and find truth, which is what I should have been doing all those years when I was growing up as a kid and everything. My parents should have been in truth and in what was real and what was legitimate substance. But, you know, all that to say, you know, I discovered the real Jesus. You know, even if you are listening to this or watching this and you're not particularly, you know, a person of faith or believe in the Bible or whatever, it starts with just knowing the difference between lies and truth, between knowing what's abusive and controlling and deceptive and knowing what's right. I have a saying where I say, the truth, love and truth are always in the center. You know, love is not on the right. It's not on the left. It's not Democratic. It's not Republican. It's not white. It's not black. It's not Asian. It's not Native American. Love and truth are like gravity. Everybody's feet is on the ground. Anywhere you go, water is always wet. You know, some things, they're not hard. They're just kind of like, in order for us to walk into something toxic, we really have to get exposed to some lies. In order to really do some certain things, coming back and saying, I want truth into my life. I want value. I want my self-worth back. All the things that I was told, they crushed my spirit. That's why I kept having the asthma attacks. Those asthma attacks were like clockwork. They would start like on a Monday, end on a Wednesday. And then week number 2, they start on Thursday, and Thursday, Friday, end on a Saturday. Next week, it would start on Sunday, and it would just be like boom, 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 boom. You know, and it did that for years. It was almost cryptic. It's like, how can someone have asthma attacks on the dime? I remember a friend of mine, you know, like an acquaintance friend of mine that I heard speak. She talked about going through this abusive situation. And this person was talking about how when Sunday afternoon would come, she had been staying with her family all that weekend. And what had happened was what they called stress-induced asthma. So that for this person would have an asthma attack every Sunday night, right when, you know, their family, they would come back and go back to where they were going from staying with other family on the weekend. Mm-hmm. And every time they would get ready to leave, they would have an asthma attack, clockwork. And that's when I realized, you know, so going back to being healed and to being recovered, I started to realize that I had to go back and look at what was truth. I tell people, you know, from my own experience, I said, when you get through with the adversity, when you get through with the pain, when you get through crying and through all the disaster and the physical situations start to improve and things start to get better, you know, stop. You know, don't just say, oh, it's done. I'm done. It's over. It's not, I'm out of here. Don't do that. I tell people, get down on your knees. Do like somebody who's looking for gold and take a pan, put that muddy, dirty water in that pan and start swishing it around and look for the diamonds and gold and rubies and precious stones in that dirt. And as you sift it and flush it out, wash it out, take them diamonds, put them over here. Take the gold out of there, put it over here. Take the truth and the substance and the worthwhile things, the lessons that these painful things have told you, and put it over here in the thing, and utilize it and keep it so that you didn't go through that pain in vain. And then when people say, how did you get through? Take that pan with them gold and those diamonds and gems and precious stones and precious metal in there that you've collected. Say, this is what I found. When I went through this, this is what's in there. When you go through yours, when you get through it, yours won't look like mine, but you will have gold in yours too, and diamonds. And maybe it'll have more rubies and more, you know, amethyst and whatever other, you know, pearls and all that kind of stuff in there. But all that refining fire and all that tragedy, all that stuff, if you sift through it and flush it out, you'll find all those good things in there that are worthwhile. And that's the stuff that's your takeaway. That's your story. That's your value. That's the stuff that lets you know, oh, it wasn't in vain. I didn't go through that by accident. And now you have a weapon to go out there and help people fight against their own pain, against their own, you know, tragedies, and give them the strength and say, hey, no. There's something here. Don't just run away, you know, and go build a new house and make a different life. you need to sort through those things, and in your own time and in your own way, at some point, where appropriate and in the right process for you, tell that story. And every time I tell that story, I get stronger. I find more faith and more confidence. Do I still struggle? Do I still have depression sometimes? Do I still, have to find my footing again? Do still have to get, back on my feet and ask for help, or sit there and say, some of this pain is still trying to hang around and I'm still facing some of the issues that came from that. Do I still have to go through the self-esteem, self-value thing where I'm like, I deserve God's very best for myself? So as I began to say that to myself every day, I stopped attracting toxic women in the dating world. I stopped getting put in job situations where people would target me, or as they would know that I had noticed that I had low self-value and low self-esteem, they would place requests and things on me that if I responded to those requests, they were sensing I had low self-esteem and low value for myself. So they're like, well, let's see if he'll work for almost no money.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if I say this, disgusting, disrespectful thing to a dating woman. Let's see if they will try it. If he will fall for it. Because all relationships are tests, whether it's a job, a friendship, a marriage, a dating situation, a church relationship, and people are looking to see how you value yourself. If you value yourself low, in a low way, you'll be giving yourself away, walking around doing all kind of stuff. And people are like, man, we can run him through the anything, and you will look up and you will not be living a life of value because people know that you don't even think good about yourself.
True.
One of the things that I learned is that we all have a way of choosing someone to date, or a way of choosing what's a valuable job or whatever. If you are in a demeaned, broken, confused, low place, you will choose low. You will choose a bad, abusive person. You will choose out of desperation, out of pain. You will pick a job that abuses you and doesn't pay you properly. You will go to a church and they'll be like, oh, this is one of them folks that we can lead straight to the wolves. Get him. And so that has been the journey of healing that I've been walking in. And it's really stop believing those deep-seated lies that we tell ourselves. And, it's still a journey. It's still a process of healing. It's still a process of recovery. And every year I begin to see that more and more in my life. And more, the people that are around me are healthier and, worth my time. And I'm learning to be a healthier me,
That's great, Brad. That's great, man. Let me ask you this. Did writing your book aid in your journey to self-healing? And also, after you answer that question, tell us, if you want to, you can verbally just tell the way that people can guys, if you're watching this video, I would really suggest all of you pre-order this man's book. I'm pre-ordering it. I'm going to get this man's book. Let's support this brother, because his story, I'm sure from the comments, he has helped all of us with the things he said. So let's support this brother. Let's buy this brother's book. Answer that question, and then we can tell, you can tell where we can get your book. I'll spam the chat and I'll put it in the description as well. But go ahead and answer the question, Mike.
So tell me the question again.
Was writing your book another way of healing the things that you had gone through. How did that feel writing that book?
Well, writing the book, when I was talking about justice, the biggest thing that, we just saw a big national situation, when people go through trauma, the most important thing has to happen is there has to be justice. There has to be a way for them to speak out and for them to say XYZ situations took place. And be by that, it's the first step of acknowledgement. If you hear, AA meetings, they talk about saying, admitting there's a problem. And that's the first step is saying, hey, writing the book for me was validation. It was validation that, yes, this really happened. Yes, this pain is real. Yes, witnessing your brother dying, literally seeing him take his last breath and seeing the physicality of his body change. Yes, that is, I'm going to give you the link to pre-order it.
Okay.
This link right here is a notification link. And what I'm doing is I'm working with my publisher, and we're in the process of getting the book out this month.
Okay.
So what I'm doing is I'm notifying everybody that they can get ready to pre-order it. And so when the pre-order goes live, I'm going to send out a little text or a little notification that says, hey, here you are. So here's the link. And also, if people want to just get a simple text, because the pre-order link, it'll actually send them an email, and I'm giving away a free 5-song EP. So when they click on that Up Viral link, when they follow through with all the little processes, they get an automatic email that gives them 5 of my music songs.
Okay.
Free, just as a thank you.
Okay.
And then if they want to just be notified by text, I text them, just text to this number. I'm going to give you a number here.
Okay. Is it the number that's on your Facebook page?
Yes, it's the 615-538-7487.
Okay.
And that's it's a specific line that won't spam you or do anything weird or nuts. It just when you text me the words, I want the book. And then when the pre-order goes live, I will give you the notification, and then there'll be a link you can go to order the book.
Okay. All right. So you made it through this entire process. You are still going through your journey, but your journey is in a much brighter place than it was. Looking back on all of that, how do you feel about where you come versus where you were? How does it feel to look back on that whole situation and see where you are now? Because I know personally, my story is nothing like yours. Everybody's story is their story. Everyone's journey is their journey. And what may be not so much to one person would be everything to another person. You have to take each person's journey is their journey. And I know looking back at my own journey, there are times when I look at myself and think, man, you did it. I didn't know how I was going to get through it, but I did it. When you look back at your journey from where you are now, how do you feel about yourself? And how does it feel to have gotten to where you are now?
It's funny because I've had to start saying to myself, you know what? I'm badass. Without being arrogant, without being a jerk, and being, the kind of person that somebody's like, we don't like you, and even being a bad person toward myself. See, that's where self-awareness, self-healing through truth and through love. I tell people all the time, if you look at the earth, it spins because it's perfectly balanced. Everything in the universe is revolving or circulating or orbiting. Everything is spheres, curves, globes, balls. You never see anything in nature that is a square. You may see triangles, you may see rectangles, or you may see, like even a fish is a circle. Everything's about coming full circle. This banjo was brought to the United States by Africa. The original African instrument that this is based off of is a gourd and a stick with a string on it. Most of what you know by way of the blues, by way of like the blues guitars that you see them, in the country music, and they're playing a little thing and they're sliding the thing. That's a slide guitar or a pedal steel. Blacks invented that. Used to take a stick and tie a string to it, and they would take some kind of slick item and pull the string, and it go, and they do the same thing with the gourd. This would be the gourd right here, and then this would be where the string was. It's still that way in Nigeria, Africa right now. They're still playing the original version of the banjo in Africa right now. And this instrument, that I'm playing now, in Franklin, Tennessee, where the biggest battle of the Civil War against slavery was fought, where the primary battle against slavery was won by the North. This instrument is the result of coming through that warfare in its full circle. We are now, the Irish and the blacks and the Europeans, they combined their efforts to make this instrument. We are now, in a world where, as I'm looking at my life, I'll never forget Oprah's post-producer talking to me about my book. And she said, Michael, you're coming full circle. And I remembered when she said that I had started playing the banjo for the last 2.5 years. And, literally living on the battle line, whereas I've lived here in Franklin, on the very battle line where the North beat the South and ended the oppression. So many things in your life will start to speak in a congruency. In 2000, the bottom end of 2016 into 2017, I had been hearing the word so much, tell your story, tell your story, tell your story. I met the owner of the Johnny Cash farm. Johnny Cash had a farm in Bon Aqua. His original house, his celebrity house, was in Hendersonville. But what he would do is he'd tell everybody that he lived in Hendersonville. And all the people would get on the bus and they'd go up there and drive in front of his house and everything. And he'd let them folks go all the way up there. For 40 years he did this. But really, he lived down in Bon Aqua, just south of Franklin, south of Spring Hill, for 40 years. And he had this house. And this guy bought this little chapel where him and his band used to hang out, and they'd all have parties. They'd put pews inside this little building, and they had a stage in there, and they would eat and drink and have a good time. Well, in 1976, he did a party in there, and everybody honored him for 21 years in country music. And the guy that got him on drugs publicly stood up in that gathering. It was a pretty large gathering, and he confessed to giving Johnny Cash and getting him on drugs and helping him become an addict. By this point, Johnny Cash is going to church, publicly talking about being a Christian, though not being religious, because he stayed in the secular music world all those years. All the while, just a couple years ago, I found out he had a church called Cowboy Church. Him and his sister and his wife and her sister's husband were, going to this church, and every church after church, he'd get over and he'd sign autographs in a Tubman's music store.
Mm-hmm.
And after church, everybody'd come over and he'd sign autographs. So here's a guy that's singing country music and doing the finger thing, as we all know him doing on his pictures, and then, he comes full circle. And, as you were asking me about feeling about myself, and I'm talking about coming full circle.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of 2016, of every place I went, people kept saying, tell your story. It would just come out of people's mouths so randomly. And I knew it was like, this is such a spiritual thing that's happening with this story. So the owner of the Johnny Cash farm and museum walks up to me and he says, would you like to come play at the Johnny Cash Storytellers Museum at the end of 2016? Remember when I told you the couple started telling about, we tell our story?
Right.
And I remember thinking, oh my God, this thing is a thing. When you start following your path, when you start following the God-given direction for you, I'm talking about a healthy thing. I'm talking about the thing that's right. Because going to church don't make you healthy. Following people's doctrines don't make you healthy. Following the truth that God has put in you, that is just in your human DNA, that is the healthy you, that is I tell people all the time, you are the God's voice in the earth.
I agree with that statement. That is exactly how I feel about it. I agree with that statement 100%.
Hold on.
All right. All right. He'll be back. I had to mute him real quick. Hopefully he got that taken care of. Let's see here. See if he still has some issues here. Hold on. All right. Guys, I hope that you all have enjoyed this show, man. This has been a really good conversation with Mike. Hold on. Okay, Mike, you're muted. So you're going to have to click your screen and unmute your mic because that thing was going to bust my eardrums. So I think if you click on your name, are you on? There you go. All right. There we go.
Sorry about that, guys.
You all right? Your house ain't burning down, is it, brother?
No, I have a propane heater in my house, and it's natural gas, but it kind of I guess kind of elevated the temperature, and something kind of like went off and like.
All right. Go ahead and hit them with some of your music, man. Give them something that can close out this conversation. It's been amazing. Give them something.
Can you guys hear okay?
Yep.
This song is called Don't Let It Get the Best of You. We've all been down for the count. We've all been done wrong sometime. We've all got days that we'd like to embrace, but you can't turn back lost time. Don't let it get the best of you. Don't let it get the best of you. Nah, 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 nah. Na 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 get the best of you. Don't let it get the best of you. Nah, 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 nah. Nah, 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 nah. Every day is a chance to look up from the crowd, rise above the ground, and take flight. Every day's a chance, oh, to look up from the crowd, rise above the ground, and take flight. Don't let it get the best of you. Don't let it get the best of you. Oh, don't let it get the best of you. Don't let it get the best of you. Nah, 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 nah.
Hey, brother, that junk is dope, man. Hey, man, I don't think there's any better way to end this conversation than with that song. Mike, bro, I can't tell you how much I respect you for this conversation, everything that you're doing, for your book, your journey from getting from where you've been to where you are. I've been looking at the chat while you've been talking. Everyone's been really agreeing with the things you're saying, and people are really like behind what you're doing, bro. Thank you so much for spending some time. I had no idea we would talk for almost 2 hours, but we did. And I've enjoyed every moment of it, bro. If there's any last words you want to say to people who are in this situation, maybe where you were and are trying to get out of it, man, just say whatever you can say to help them out, and we'll just go ahead and shut it down. But, bro, thank you so much for having and spending this time with me. I really appreciate it, Mike.
Well, Keith, thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that stood here, because this was a little bit of a long session. And guys, it doesn't, my story doesn't matter unless it touches someone's heart, unless somebody finds something worthwhile from it. I've never thought that my story was worth something, that my experience, which was part of why I went through so much for so long, because when you don't value your story, even if it's, I grew up in a cul-de-sac and lived in the Midwest and nothing bad ever happened to me, there's still things that happened in your story that are important. I tell people I've realized something, at least in my thought, and that is we live in a world with a lot of self-help books, a lot of, go to this seminar, get this webinar, get this book. The greatest self-help that there is the stories that we each have, where we had little bitty situations or little bitty circumstances that we had to make a choice that we were going to try to go on and try to overcome and try to go forward. And those little bitty situations or big choices that we made are the biggest self-help tools that there are. Your story is the biggest self-help thing out there that you could ever tell anybody. And if you're in abuse, if you're in situations, if you're in trauma, if you're suicidal, go find some help. Go ask for help. And if you are in a situation where you can't really talk about what's happening to you, go somewhere where you can find somebody that you can trust. If there is one thing that you can do just to help yourself get out of whatever cult or whatever it might be, if you've been suppressing and holding back talking about what you've been through, I get it. But at some point, to give yourself that first line of justice, even at some point, the people that have hurt you or abused you also at some point are dealt with. But for yourself, just getting the acknowledgement of the real facts and the real truth of what you've been through is so important. And your story is the greatest asset you have. It's the greatest tool you have. It's the greatest authentic thing that makes you who you are. If you look at the musicians and actors and people that we really respect, like Oprah and Johnny Cash, it's their story. The movies that if you look at all the movies out right now, documentaries are going crazy right now.
Right, true.
I want real substance. The most authentic things out there are your stories. So tell your story. If nothing else, start telling your story by going and asking and telling someone, hey, I'm in trouble. Go and, it's not too much. It's not undignified to say, I need help. And we all need one another. We all got to love one another and support one another and stand by one another. Don't let it get the best of you. Even if it's one little bitty decision, one little bitty thing that can keep you on your dream and keep you focused, dreaming of being a musician and being an artist, and teaching me how to tell my stories, how I learned to write songs, and how to take my story and put it into music. And country music is all about telling stories. So visit my website, themichaelricks.com. Also sign up if you would for my book and get the text. Please, do all the social media, the Michael Ricks stuff, and you guys will look that up if you want to follow me. And please follow Keith if you're new to this. And Keith, thank you again. My book is called From Cult to Country, an Asthmatic's Journey to Find More Air.
Wow, what a great title.
Oh, well, thank you. I got to show y'all something. And just to show you, I am taking my meds. Just to prove to you that I still get help for myself and don't, live in a joke or making light of certain things, that I'm trying to be as serious and authentic and as real as I can. I love you guys, and I love you, Keith, and thank you.
Likewise, brother. Likewise. Guys, we're gonna go ahead and end this. Mike, don't hang up yet, because I still want to. There's a couple things I want to say to you and get some information to you and from you, so I can post it on the channel. But otherwise, guys, I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up for the night. I know it's late, and some of y'all are saying, I want to stay, but I got to get up and go to work tomorrow. So even though some of them said they had to leave, but when you started singing, they still stayed and waited for the whole song.
Oh, thank you guys so much. Thank you. I appreciate your time and honor that you took the time to stay with me.
So yeah, guys, Mike, thank you so much again for joining us. Guys, again, we're having another show. Free Monique will be with us this Thursday, the 18th, and we're going to talk about how Black people were viewed in the JW organization. Then we're going to be back again on Friday to finish our conversation from the video I had about forgiving ex-family and friends who have shunned you. Should you forgive them or should you not? We're going to have that conversation again this Friday. So yeah, guys, again, thank you so much for watching. Please go to themichaelricks.com. I spammed the website in the chat. I'll also put it in the description and the links to Mike's books. So Mike, thank you again, guy, and we will see you guys. I'll see you real soon. Hopefully we'll have you back on again sometime, bro.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
All right, guys. Good night. See you all in the next one. Peace.